Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's Overcoming Podcast episode. I'm glad to welcome our new guest, Dr. Kara Wada. Dr. Kara Wada is a board-certified academic adult and pediatric immunology and lifestyle medicine physician. She is a Sjogren's patient, a certified life coach, and a TEDx speaker. Welcome, Dr. Kara.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to talk today.
I'm excited for you to be here too. I just want to talk about one, you're the Crunchy Allergist, right? That is like, you're synonymous with the Crunchy
That's
Allergist.
my nickname, yes. Yep.
So how did you get that nickname?
Yeah, so as through medical training, essentially to become an allergist immunologist, you do your 4 years of medical school, and then after medical school, you need to do a residency, which is when you are actually like doing more medicine, seeing a lot of patients. So after that, if you want to specialize, then that's fellowship. So during our fellowship, that's where I specialized in allergy immunology. And as a capstone before you graduate, our program required us to give a talk on any topic, preferably related to allergy immunology, but something that I could speak for an hour about and that I was excited about. And something that always had resonated with me was going back to some of the more natural approaches to healing. So often I had patients asking about what's the evidence behind honey for allergies, or is there a role for yoga or acupuncture? And I really wanted to dig in and see, okay, what do we have for scientific evidence behind those treatments? What's the potential for harm? Take through some of the decision making in that. And so it was out of that presentation that I gained that nickname from my colleagues, and it became my social media handle, and we went from there.
That's amazing. Yep. And one of your descriptions, I did say I wanted to kind of bring that because I wasn't sure what it was, but you said you are a Sjogren's patient. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so Sjogren's is a systemic autoimmune disease. It is sometimes called systemic Sjogren's or Sjogren's syndrome. It is a condition that is related to lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, and sometimes people can have both of those diagnoses. It primarily is associated with dryness. So eye dryness, mouth dryness, nose dryness. And at some point along the way, most patients will have some tissue dryness they experience, but not everyone will have that off the bat. A lot of the symptoms that I experienced early on, I only now recognize as Sjogren's symptoms, in large part because of my interaction and the welcoming I've had from the Sjogren's community. So I dealt with a lot of fatigue, a lot of digestive issues, kind of IBS type symptoms, body pain, brain fog. And these are symptoms that were not taught to me for my immunology boards. It was a whole new education. I think I received over and beyond what I learned about this condition in order to pass a test or theoretically treat patients for it. And it's really unfortunate because Sjogren's is a condition that affects, we estimate, up to maybe 1 in 100 individuals. It's actually quite common. 3/4 of folks, though, don't have a diagnosis. So they're kind of walking around with this diagnosis and don't know it. And of those people who are affected, 90% of whom are women. It's a disease that doesn't have a lot of research behind it. And there's probably a lot that plays into that. The joke, though, amongst us in the community is that no one knows about it and we don't study it because no one knows how to pronounce it. And it looks like it looks like it should be a chair at IKEA rather than the name of a serious condition that can really affect our quality of life and increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of specific cancers. There's a lot involved in it. And so part of this work that I do as, the Crunchy Allergist and getting out on social media and podcasts is really bringing more awareness and making this invisible illness more visible for healthcare providers, for the community, so on and so forth.
So Sjogren's, for those of you who are wondering how it's spelled, because before this, I only knew how to say it because I asked Kara. I was like, how do you even say this? It's spelled S as in Sam, Jogren as in Nancy. So I was like, I don't know. I'm going to butcher that one too, but because she told me that's how you spell it. So if you're curious about this, that's what you would Google is Sjogren's, Sjogren. So tell me a little bit about what you do as a crunchy allergist.
So when I see patients, I see patients 3 days a week. I practice at the Ohio State University. I say the with a little tongue in cheek. If you were in the Big Ten, follow football, I moved here about 13 years ago, and now I find it hilarious that kind of a little pretentious. Anyways, I digress. But when I see patients, I really like to tap into understanding what their goals are for their health. And oftentimes what I will hear from individuals are, I really want to get to the root cause of what is going on with my body. I really want to take a more holistic approach. And I love partnering with patients to do that. So that may mean doing a little bit of coaching on the fly to say, how is your nutrition? How is your sleep? How is your stress level? Knowing that each of these aspects of our daily habits and our daily routines has really profound impact on how our immune system functions or misfires or misbehaves, as the case may be.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about different types of pain, inflammation, and snoring and things of that nature. And automatically they're like, okay, well, I snore, so I have sleep apnea, or I have all this, pain in my joints, or I'm gaining, I don't know if that even plays into it, like gaining weight. Is there a correlation with maybe allergens that, we're consuming or exposing ourselves to that might play into weight gain, snoring, any of that, any and all of it?
Oh my gosh, so interlinked. So if someone has untreated allergies, whether it's seasonal allergies or maybe allergies to their cat or dust mites, that causes inflammation. So an allergy, what happens is our body sees something from the outside world inappropriately as dangerous. And it mounts a specific flavor of inflammation in the body that results in sneezing, swelling of the tissues, mucus production, all those sorts of things. So if you have a stuffy, runny nose, you lay down at night, that stuffiness gets worse, and you may potentially have some sleep apnea that develops as a result of that congestion, or just may have poor quality sleep as well. All of that's going to play into energy, into pain levels, into our appetite and hunger cues. The other ways that plays into things, it alters our moods. So it can be more anxious or depressed. We think maybe related in part to sleep issues, but also sometimes medications and also to the inflammation itself. And some of the medications that we commonly use, although very safe and very effective, each and every one of us is a little different in how we metabolize medications. And so,
Mhm.
although, I frequently recommend things like Claritin, Zyrtec, Allegra, I actually recommend the generics because they're cheaper and generally tolerated just as well. Um, but there are some differences between those. And some people, not a lot, but some will notice that they will have appetite changes or weight gain when they're taking antihistamines. So antihistamines block histamine receptors. Histamine receptors are found all over our body. There are a high concentration on allergy white blood cells, so it helps calm that inflammation down, but they're also present in our brain. So that's why, especially if you take something like Benadryl, you can end up with either most people will end up really sleepy. A small portion of people will end up really wired and actually bouncing off the wall, because there are some of those receptors present in our brain in some of those areas that are functioning in our awake and sleep kind of type physiology.
Oh my gosh, I'm a little bit mind blown right now. Couple of things. Um, so at the time of this recording, I am proudly 39 years old. And
Me too.
yeah, there you go.
Yay.
We're less than a year away from entering the 40s. Yeah. So last year, I started realizing I had a really, really bad sleep to the point where I was waking myself up. Like I was not typically a snorer, but this last year I was snoring and I had COVID. Um, not too long before that, but like my whole body just like went haywire. Like my pulse, my heart rate, blood pressure, everything was just kind of going all wonky. And I went to a sleep doctor. I don't know what they're called right now, pulmonologist, or I don't know, but he did a sleep study. And he was like, no, you don't have sleep apnea. I'm like, well, I don't know how that's possible because I kept waking myself up, right? And while I had that little fancy gadget on my head. And I ended up also going to an ENT because he was like, well, you've got, some swollen stuff going on over here. So I was like, well, maybe I need to go check an allergist, right?
Yeah.
So I went to the allergist and he's like, wow, your terminates are like incredibly swollen. And apparently I have a deviated septum that I had no idea I had. But he recommended to try allergy medicine. I mean, I was 38 last year and I'm sitting there going, I've lived in Texas for 38 years. I have zero allergies. Y'all are all suckers. Like I am just killing it, right? And little did I know, apparently, I'm one of those people who doesn't get the runny nose and the itchy stuff. It's like just the internal swelling. So I started using the antihistamine, Flonase. I guess I don't know if that's considered an antihistamine, but I started using Flonase, and it does correlate because I did end up gaining some weight once I started using that, but I had no idea. I was just like, oh, I don't know why I'm gaining all this weight all of a sudden. But that'd be interesting for me to look into personally. But the idea that, different people react to the medicines differently. Well, I think most people can generally say that. Like I was one of those people who with epidurals, me and epidural,
Yeah.
we are not
Neither. Yep.
simpatico.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and so I've always known like my body just takes medicine and just decides to like run with it and go crazy. So in those situations, like what do people do to discover like, is this medicine actually not beneficial for me versus this other one?
Sorry. So one of the things that I think is really helpful for me is when a patient comes in asking these questions, is if they have can, kind of taken note or been kind of a scientist in their experience. So I think it is really helpful to know kind of, first of all, what symptoms are you worried about maybe connected? How long after starting the medicine did they start up? Are they reproducible if you've continued to take it, or did they go away when you stopped to take the medicine? Some of those like detective type questions are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If you are someone who's like, oh gosh, I am just a sensitive person when it comes to medications. I think starting low and slow is generally a good rule of thumb. I would, though, talk with your healthcare professional because certain medicines, you wouldn't want to necessarily adjust the dose without, having some guidance with that. For instance, antibiotics would be one that I may want to adjust kind of how we're doing things if we're going to start with a smaller dose or a test dose. And if you are someone who is more sensitive, I think that may be a reason, or if you're already seeing an allergist for another reason, to have that conversation too and say, hey, what things do I actually need to be worried about? What things are more annoying? Because the reality is, if someone, I'm going to use the example of penicillin allergy, something I see patients for in the office really often, or I'll get called about patients in the hospital about this. About 1 in 10 people has penicillin allergy on their medical chart. But when you look at that 10% of all comers, only about 1 in 100 is actually still allergic to penicillin when you go through like the testing. Most of us have that on our chart in hindsight, inappropriately, or we've outgrown our allergy. And so we, for a long time as physicians, nurse practitioners, like we were taught that the greater harm was potentially giving someone something that they were allergic to. But with increased research and study, we've realized it's actually the reverse. Having that allergy on your chart is actually an increased risk for having bad side effects from alternative medicines. So people who have penicillin allergy on their chart are going to be more likely to get very broad spectrum antibiotics. They're like the big guns that demolish our microbiome, can end up with this terrible diarrheal illness called C. diff, which is something you would not wish on your worst enemy. You see longer hospital stays, increased risk of infections after surgery, like at the site of surgery, increased healthcare costs too. So it's one of these things where it's really helpful to then know, is penicillin or another medicine something I absolutely need to avoid because it's potentially harmful? Or is a medicine, maybe under the right circumstances, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like if I know that I may get an annoying rash that's not harmful, but it would treat, something that's potentially life-threatening, you kind of have to do that math. And that's where we can be helpful to try to tease that out.
So if someone's been told that they have an allergy to penicillin, then it would be a good suggestion to go meet with an allergist, is what you're saying.
And we can help. Yeah, we're happy to help. Yeah, we have good testing. And sometimes we'll do skin testing. Sometimes we'll, depending on the story, we'll just give someone a dose of amoxicillin and watch them, make sure they do okay. It's a pretty easy process. And it's helpful to do when you're healthy, not a lot going on, as opposed to, when you're under crunch zone of like, I got this ear infection or appendicitis or something like that.
So I guess the bigger question, if I can ask it correctly, basically, what are the symptoms that may be a sign that you are struggling with some sort of allergy, some sort of immune system issue?
Yeah, so I go back to, what is inflammation? So inflammation is our body's response to infection, to injury, and to insult. In the insult category, we have allergies, we have autoimmunity, and then there's this newer entity we're discussing too, where it's called dysmetabolism, but essentially where our metabolism is goofed up and not kind of working right, causes inflammation. So if you think about infection and injury, we want inflammation because in that point, our immune system is going to help with the healing process. But in that insult category, inflammation's kind of gone awry. It's like not following the textbook, and it's causing more problems than it is helping us. So an allergy, our immune system is seeing the outside world as dangerous, and that's inappropriate. autoimmunity, our body is failing to see our own tissues as safe. And so that's equally as problematic.
Mm-hmm.
When we have inflammation, there's different flavors of it. So it can come and look in different ways. With allergy, there tends to be a lot of itching, sneezing, swelling. Essentially, it's particular immune system cells that are getting activated or triggered that once in a blue moon, or not a long time ago, when we were, living in caves around the campfires, we needed white blood cells or infection fighting cells to protect us from parasite infections.
Mm-hmm.
And knock on wood, we don't typically get parasite infections now. So we don't associate those responses with those infections. We associate those responses and those symptoms with allergies. Autoimmunity also takes different flavors. And so, but overall, we'll see a lot of increased fatigue, brain fog. You'll hear a lot of times issues with body pain, sometimes joint stiffness, trouble with digestion. So either constipation, diarrhea. All of these are signs and symptoms that your body is potentially overreacting to either itself or the environment.
Hey, either itself or the environment. That's a lot of symptoms that can easily be, it sounds like could be misdiagnosed, right? Like if you're having constipation and stuff like that, somebody might go to their general practitioner or a
GI doc or
GI. There you go. I was like, what's that doctor? The GI doc. And at some point, I feel like, especially in Western medicine, there's often that the quick response to give you medicine. Yes. For those of you who do not see what you're doing with your hands, it's like whack-a-mole. Are you doing whack-a-mole?
Yeah. And it's this game of like hot potato. Like you go into one office and they're like, oh, not it. Let's pass you to the other specialist.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Yeah. Or here's the quick fix, try this. And then if it doesn't work, call me.
Yeah. So as a crunchy allergist, what is your approach on that?
Yeah, so it's not uncommon that I will have patients come to see me for second opinion or, name the number opinion. And those are the situations where I really like to take a deep breath and let the patient share their whole story, because they're going to direct me to where we need to go. I think that's a huge part. And one of the big disadvantages of our broken healthcare system is so often people just don't have a chance to share their story. And then I listen and get curious, and try to see things from that airplane view as the whole of what may be going on. Does this sound like something that could be immune system driven? Most of the diseases that we see in our modern existence have a basis in inflammation and inappropriate inflammation. Even as we think about heart disease and diabetes, and when we think of kind of root causes of things, that's where things are. And so that's where I find, the skill set of being trained as an allergist immunologist, pediatrician, and an internist before that. Like I try my best to see that whole picture and then narrow in on, okay, where do we need to go from here? Is it blood work or imaging? Do we need to talk with a particular specialist that maybe has some expert knowledge that I don't know? And work together as a team, patient, myself, and whomever else is involved in that person's care.
Do you also then work with autoimmune diseases?
To some degree. And part of it, our medical system is very siloed. So, but within the immune system sphere, some things that are considered allergic in nature now that we've learned more about it, or traditionally we're considered allergic. So for instance, chronic hives and
Hmm.
chronic swelling called angioedema, it's something that one would think would be allergic because it's hives. It's actually autoimmune. So that's something I take care of patients with that, or mast cell disorders. There's another condition that is an overlap called eosinophilic esophagitis or eosinophilic disorders. There are other little types of white blood cells, have this long name, cause a lot of problems and wreak a lot of havoc in our bodies. But there are some patients that there is an allergic trigger, some there isn't. So the more we learn, and even asthma, for instance, asthma, we always kind of asthma allergies, group them together, but
Hmm.
there are flavors of inflammation and asthma that are very much autoimmune in nature. So, some of the lines that we drew in the sand between allergy immunology, rheumatology, which is another
Yeah.
condition or another type of medicine that has significant overlap. It's like our Venn diagrams overlap a fair bit. Um, those lines are really rapidly diminishing.
I find it really interesting, just the idea that so many of us walk around without being aware of allergies, right? And I've never had my kids tested just to even know. I've never been tested myself, being 39 years old, because, I'm from Texas and I have no allergies. um, I did have it scheduled for late last year and just have not been able to get it back in my books because my kids were sick like 2 months solid in the winter.
I feel that.
So, but it's something that's on my to-do list is to just get a bigger picture of
Yeah.
what works for my body and what doesn't, right? And what
Yeah.
might be causing inflammation. And I feel like a lot of people have never done that and they don't often do it until it gets to a point where they are in a lot of pain or something's going on and they're just like, what is going on with my body? Like, and doctors can't figure it out, or they're just passing me off to other people.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because there is, and I will ask a question about certain something else, but it does seem like allergies have a significant impact on your quality of life without you
Absolutely.
realizing it.
Yeah. I even think back, and it could be congestion, it can be other ways too, but thinking back as a kiddo, I lived in a house growing up that used a wood burning fireplace for heat, like as part of the heating
Mhm.
system. We also had regular heat, but that was the way my parents kind of cut down on the electric bill. And also at the time, my mom smoked. And I remember in first grade, we were moving, they built a new house, and my mom was bound and determined to quit smoking for good. Because she wasn't going to smoke in the new house. The new house also did not have a wood burning stove.
Mhm.
I didn't realize until after we moved, I never knew what it was like to breathe through my nose. I had to learn how to breathe through my nose. Like I was always stuffy. I lived on Dimetapp as a kiddo, the great
Wow.
Dimetapp. And it's like, oh, sometimes you don't notice how bad it is until you get some relief and you're like, oh. I remember the same thing with my back stiffness related to my Sjogren's. I had a really bad flare up. It's a long story, but I ended up with an acute hepatitis, and my liver enzymes were like through the roof, and a biopsy, this whole big deal. And that was like really what pushed me to be like, okay, I need to make some huge changes in my lifestyle. And I cut out, refined like foods for a while, really upped like the fruits and veggies, totally turned stuff around. And within 3 days, like my back stiffness eased up. I could play on the floor with my kids again. And I was like, this is what this is supposed to feel like. I haven't
Wow.
felt this, and I was like, hmm. And now learning what I've learned, I'm like, okay, we know the microbiome changes, has a potential to change pretty quickly. that, that can, changing what we eat can change our physiology actually relatively quickly. I also, trying to get more sleep and some other stuff in there as well. But it's really hard sometimes when things come on kind of insidiously or kind of that slow creeping, in, that sometimes you just don't know how bad it is until you get some relief.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. And it was, for me going to the allergist, or I guess technically he's an ENT allergist.
ENT,
I don't know. Yeah.
yeah.
They were just like, try the spray at night and see how that
Yeah.
goes. And
Yeah.
I kid you not, like I religiously take my spray now, and I can tell you it doesn't like completely, make it 100% better, but I sleep at night perfectly
Yeah.
fine now. I'm
Huge.
oh my
Huge.
gosh.
Life
Oh,
changing.
yeah. And I know
Yeah.
I've yet to address like the actual, like, what is it that I'm allergic to? Because there are people who talk about taking this test and like, oh my gosh, I realized I was allergic to this or this or that. And like my sister, for one, at one point, her test showed that she was allergic to rice, and being, a Latin family, we had a lot of rice. I was like, what?
Yeah.
You've been allergic to rice this whole time? And apparently I think it was just a temporary thing. Um, it was like a temporary allergy, which is interesting enough for me because I'm like, we'll get into that in a minute.
We can talk. Yeah. We
Yeah,
can
go
dig into
ahead.
that.
And what is
Yeah.
like, what causes temporary allergies, I
Oh,
guess?
so, well, let's dig in a little bit to allergy versus kind of intolerance sensitivity. So there's kind of a pretty strict definition, at least from an allergist standpoint, of kind of what allergy is, especially as it relates to food. Essentially, allergy is a specific type of immune response. Your body makes something called IgE as an egg, proteins or antibodies specific against a particular pollen, dust mite, pet dander, peanut, for instance. And when you are exposed to this particular trigger, it's like a lock and a key. And it opens up those allergy cells. They release things like histamine and tryptase, and you itchy, sneezy. If it's food, you throw up, maybe wheeze, potentially pass out. And those are those situations, especially with food, where you would need to strictly avoid those foods and use an EpiPen should you have a reaction. What's really hard with food allergy and food allergy testing is the testing is not perfect, in that some people will have that protein or that antibody in their bloodstream, but when they eat the food, they do fine. So the best test for food allergy is actually what happens when you eat the food. Now you can imagine though, like if you're bringing your kiddo in, or if you came to see me and said, hey, Dr. Wada, every time I have peanut, I wheeze and I throw up. Like the idea of feeding you peanut on purpose doesn't sound ethical or safe, right? So like that's where testing is really helpful to help confirm that suspicion. But that's just a really small subset of what happens when we eat foods, right? Like, or the potential symptoms we could have. Like, for instance, another like easy example is caffeine. Like there are some foods that we have anticipated responses to. Like caffeine, we anticipate we're going to have a biologic response. It's going to keep us awake, maybe a little more focused. We may have to go to the bathroom. Like it has kind of some known side effects, almost like a medication associated with it. So that's kind of another category. And then there are some folks that are just more sensitive to some of those biologically active components to food. And those tend to have kind of a dose related effect. So for instance, some people are really sensitive to sulfites or sulfates. So like some of the preservatives in like dried fruit or in wine that, sometimes some of us are more sensitive to. Or histamine, for instance, is in a lot of fermented foods, preserved foods like luncheon meats, those sorts of things,
Okay.
and in shellfish, for instance. And so some people will have symptoms when they ingest too much histamine. They'll get more itching, sneezing, stomach upset, have to run to the bathroom. So those are kind of, its own category too. And we don't have specific testing to confirm those issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking a really good history, me putting on my Sherlock Holmes detective hat and listening and picking out, okay, what are those foods you're noticing, or those meals that are problematic, and what's happening. And that's where keeping a food and symptom journal can be really helpful, as personally, but also as I work together with patients to help them tease out, okay, what are your specific triggers? And part of that is because the other testing that's out there and available, so it's really easy for you to go online, and now you're going to hear it, and your phone is going to show you all sorts of ads for it because you'll hear it now, like food sensitivity testing. And most often what's out there for food sensitivity testing is something called IgG, as in goat, testing. IgG is our immune system's memory protein. The problem is it doesn't tell us if it's a good memory or if it's like a nightmare. It just says that our immune system has seen this food before. So we've eaten it or something that looked like it at some point. And if you read the fine print on those companies' little websites or things, so you need to follow up with an elimination challenge to see if this truly is a problem or not. So the jury, I tend to say, okay, let's instead focus on adding to the diet. What can we add that's going to be beneficial? First of all, that's just a better place to be instead of kind of this elimination diet kind of mindset. And then let's see and tease out, are there some things that you do have a little more trouble tolerating? Is it a lactose issue? Do you have issues maybe with gluten? Let's make sure you don't have celiac, some of those other things. And so that tends to be my approach, that trying to help people save money, avoid a poke, and also be conscientious consumers about what's out there, because there is a lot of marketing trying to sell you a lot of testing and other things that just not there yet.
Good to know. So I'm going to, because I know our time is kind of coming near the end. And so I would love for people to hear about your coaching program and how you help other people, even if they're not at the Ohio State.
So, I mean, the reality is when we know more about the human body than we ever have, and yet we still walk out of our doctor's appointments really feeling pretty overwhelmed, frustrated. A lot of times we don't feel heard. And then we go home and we check out, go online to the support groups. This is exactly what I did after my diagnosis. I went to the support groups looking for information and help, kind of crowdsourcing ideas on what to do. And it's really overwhelming. Feel like totally powerless. And when I went looking for some sort of path forward, some sort of like, okay, I need some clarity, I need to feel confident in my decision making, I really felt like stuck in this overwhelm. And so that's why I created Becoming Immune Confident, which is a 12-week jumpstart program, but also includes 12 months of ongoing support, helping my clients gain the clarity, the conviction, and the confidence to really take on all the ups and downs that are going to come along with living life with too much inflammation. So things like allergies, asthma, autoimmune disease, and we go through the mindset. I partner with my colleague and friend and dietitian, Jen Thorani, who is specifically trained in anti-inflammatory nutrition and focuses in on really knowing the ins and outs of nutrition, because the reality is, although I've learned a lot, I don't teach a lot of nutrition in medical school. And we do this in a very trauma-informed approach to help folks for the long term. So not getting on another diet, but really building those skills and the resilience for the sustainable and for happily ever after.
What is a
Yeah.
trauma-informed approach in your field?
Yeah. So, really holding space for each of my clients to be able to forge their own path and be there to support them through that. I am there as a resource and to help guide, but I'm also there to help honor their inner knowing and support that on their journey as well. And I think those are the skills that, take some time and practice to continue to grow into.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Kara. I loved all of the information. You're so knowledgeable. I'm like, I would just keep asking you a million questions because I am like the queen of curiosity. So
I love it. I think that's what's so fun about this space and like leaning in, getting curious, using that right side of our brain again that we sometimes forget exists, like when we're in school and like the to-do list and the busy. That's awesome.
So I appreciate you coming. And if people want to learn more about your services, what you do, or your Become Immune Confident program, and it sounds like you have a podcast too, right?
Yes, I do. It's called Becoming Immune Confident, and they can check out my website at drkarawada.com or immuneconfident.com. And on socials, I'm at Crunchy Allergist.
And I will make sure and post all of the links to your website, your podcast, and your social media tags so that people can find you, follow you, and just learn more from you. I know they gain so much value from just hearing you today on this podcast. So I just want to say thank you again for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was super fun.
And thank you so much, audience, for joining me today. And I hope you found this informative. If you want to get a hold of her, just look at the show notes and you'll be able to find ways to connect with Dr. Kara Wada, which is WADA. It's a fun name, by the way. So thank you so much for all of you joining us today.